The Girl and the Invisible Swarm. A calm story about unease, thoughts, courage, and finding a home inside yourself. Welcome to the Safe Den. The Safe Den is a place for children, young people, and adults who sometimes need somewhere gentle to land. A place where you do not have to be perfect, strong, or brave all the time. A place where you are allowed to be exactly as you are. Here, the stories are quiet and warm-hearted. They are stories about unease, courage, presence, and safety. They do not hurry. They are meant to be read slowly. This story is about Naja, a girl who feels a lot, and who often believes she is alone with her thoughts. In Dreamland, she meets Murmur, Unease the Owl, Twine, and several small dream beings who help her find calm, truth, and a little more belief in herself. The Girl and the Invisible Swarm. This time, we are going to meet a girl named Naja. Naja was the kind of girl who noticed many things. She noticed when someone answered a little shorter than usual. She noticed when a door was closed a little harder than it normally was. She noticed when someone looked away in the middle of a sentence. And she noticed when people whispered together in a corner. Even when it probably had nothing to do with her, it could still feel as if it did. It was not because Naja was always sad. She could laugh. She could be excited. Very excited, actually. She could run and play, dream, and imagine the strangest things. But inside her, there was also something else. A kind of invisible swarm. It was not something other people could see, but Naja could feel it almost every day. It swarmed when she woke up in the morning and remembered everything she had to do. It swarmed when she had to leave the house and remember her lunch, her jacket, her school bag, her pencil case, and the right face. It swarmed when she came to school and had to be kind, but not too quiet. Funny, but not too strange. Clever, but not too perfect. Brave, but not weird. Included, but not taking up too much space. Herself, but in a way that other people would still like. Some days it felt as if there were 1,000 invisible rules that everyone else knew by heart. As if the whole world was one big dance floor where everyone already knew the steps. And only Naja was always trying to guess when to turn, when to jump, when to be quiet, and when to smile. The worst part was not always what happened around her. The worst part was what she imagined other people were thinking. Do they think I am strange? Was that a stupid thing to say? Can they see that I became unsure? Am I the only one who feels like this? Why does it look as if everyone else knows how to be? Naja often imagined things like that. She often believed that other people did not have the same thoughts. She believed she was one of the only people who could feel completely tired just from being around others. One of the only ones who could feel wrong, even on days when nothing very special had happened. And when she believed that, the invisible swarm grew. It grew like reeds in the wind, like birds all flying up at once, like leaves caught by a whirlwind, spinning around without direction. One evening, Naja had had one of those days again, a day where everything had sat just a little crooked. She had said something in class and no one had really reacted. Later, some of the others had laughed. She did not know if they were laughing at her, but her stomach tightened anyway. At break time, she had stood for too long, trying to work out where she was supposed to stand. And when she came home, she was so tired inside that she could not even explain why. She ate a little dinner without really tasting it. Afterward, she went into her room. Her room was safe in its own quiet way. The small lamp beside the bed shone with warm golden light. The curtain moved softly in the open window. Outside, she could hear the wind brushing across the trees. On her shelf stood her little things, a round stone, an old glass figure, a shell with a pink inside, a small notebook, and a doll that always sat with her face slightly tilted, as if she were listening. Naja sat on her bed and pulled the duvet all the way up around her knees. She placed her hand on her chest. Inside, her heart was beating a little faster than she wanted it to. "I do not really like this," she whispered into the room. They were not angry words. They were tired words. "I do not like thinking so much. I do not like being afraid of what other people think. I do not like feeling behind all the time." The room became completely still, so still that she began to hear the very small sounds. A soft creak from the floor, the leaves outside, her own breathing. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And right there, between the third and the fourth exhale, something happened. It did not begin with a bang. It did not begin with a flash of light. It began with a gentle scent of rain on warm earth, of moss, of night flowers that only open when the world becomes a little quieter, and of something sweet and golden, like warm honey mixed with forest air. Naja lifted her head. Her room was still there, but the light had become softer. The shadows had become deeper, and on the floor, right in front of her bed, a thin stripe of silver light began to draw itself like a path. A narrow path of moonlight, dust, and tiny shining specks. They looked like stars that had settled down to rest on her floor. Naja stood up slowly. She did not know if she was dreaming yet, or if the dream had come to her before she had fully fallen asleep. But the path was there, and when she placed her bare foot on it, it felt gently warm. Not warm like sunlight, warm like something that had been waiting for her. The path led her out through the darkness and into Dreamland. Now she stood in a forest. Not an ordinary forest. It was a forest full of the colors of night. The trees were tall and soft around the edges, as if they had been painted with brushes dipped in dark blue velvet. The leaves shimmered in deep green, copper, and silver. Between the branches hung tiny lanterns made of dewdrops, and inside each dewdrop glowed a small golden light. The ground beneath her feet was covered in moss so soft it felt like walking on pillows. Little violet flowers smelled faintly of vanilla and forest earth. Farther away she could hear running water, and an owl. The owl did not sound lonely, it sounded awake. In front of Naja stood a sign. It was made of pale wood and winding vines. On it were the words, "Welcome to the swarm path. Here walk all those who think they walk alone." Naja read the words twice because she did not quite understand what they meant. It means exactly what it says. The voice came from a shadow beside the path. Naja jumped a little. Out of the blue-green darkness stepped a creature she had never seen before. He was about the size of a small child, but round and soft, like a mixture between a baby hedgehog, a moss creature, and a sleeping cloud. His fur was made of tiny leaves, feathers, and down, changing color depending on how the light touched him. His eyes were large and amber gold. On top of his head, he wore a little crown of twigs with tiny bells that chimed whenever he moved. "My name is Murmur," said the creature, bowing gently. Naja blinked. "Murmur." "Yes," he said, "because I collect the thoughts that murmur, mumble, and crowd together. In Danish, I was called Mumri, but here in English, Murmur remembers what I do." "What do you do?" "I collect overfilled thoughts and fold them out, so they stop lying on top of each other." Naja blinked again. "That is a very strange job." "It is a very important job," said Murmur seriously. "These days, there is quite a lot to collect." Naja could not help smiling a little. "Am I in Dreamland?" "Yes," said Murmur, "or at least you are on your way through a part of Dreamland that not everyone finds, the part where you learn that thoughts can be loud without being right." Naja looked down at the path. It wound between the trees like a silver ribbon. Along its edge stood small stones marked with symbols. An eye, a hand, a star, a heart, a key, a cloud, and a boat. "Am I supposed to go somewhere?" she asked. Murmur nodded. "You are going to the quiet Heart Square. But you cannot only walk there. You must bring a few things with you first. They are not heavy things, only important things." "What things?" asked Naja. Murmur lifted his small, leafy hands. Between them, something began to shine. It was a lantern, no bigger than something Naja could hold in one hand. It was made of silver branches, clear glass leaves, and a small warm light that did not flicker. "This," said Murmur, "is a heart lantern. It does not shine on all the frightening things outside. It shines on what is true inside." Naja took it carefully. It was light and warm. "When thoughts say, 'Everyone is looking at you. Everyone is judging you. Everyone thinks you are wrong,'" said Murmur, "you can light the heart lantern and ask, 'Is this something I know? Or is this something I fear?'" Naja looked at the small light. Just holding it made her shoulders lower a little. "Come," said Murmur, "there is more." They walked together through the forest. In some places fog hung low like silk between the trees. In other places the forest opened so they could see the sky, where the stars did not simply blink. They looked as if they were listening. They passed a little stream, where the water ran over dark stones and sang in a sound like a whisper that did not want to frighten anyone. They passed an area where red mushrooms stood like small stools, and blue glowworms drew patterns between the roots. "Do you see?" said Murmur, pointing. On the other side of the stream, a large owl sat on a low branch. Naja almost recognized her at once, even though she had never seen her this close before. Unease the Owl. In Danish, her name was Uro because Uro means unease, restlessness, the unsettled feeling inside. Her feathers were brown, grey, and golden. Around her eyes rested a calmness, as if she knew both the darkness and what was behind it. She sat very still, keeping watch over the stream, as if she knew someone would need help crossing. "You have come far," said Unease the Owl in her slow, round voice. Naja nodded shyly. "It does not always feel that way," she said. "No," said the owl, "it rarely does while you are in the middle of it." Unease lifted one wing. Beneath it lay a small object, shining softly. It was a flat, round stone with a pattern carved into it, like circles spreading across water. "This is a mirror stone," said the owl. "When you look into it, you may discover something very important." Naja took the stone. It felt cool and smooth. "What do you discover?" "That you are almost never the only one," said Unease the owl. "Others shake too. Others guess too. Others lie awake and wonder, was I too much? Was I not enough? But you cannot see that on them," said Naja. "No," said the owl gently. "Exactly." The owl looked at her with her large dark eyes. "Anxiety often lies and says, 'You are alone in this.'" She paused. "But loneliness becomes smaller when you discover that many people carry invisible things." Naja let her fingers move across the mirror stone. "Will I need it later?" she asked. "Yes," said the owl, "when you come to Mirror Lake." Beside Naja, Murmur's little bells gave a soft ring. "We must go on," said Murmur. Unease the owl nodded. "Walk calmly, not quickly," said the owl. "In Dreamland, you get farthest when you do not hurry." They came to a clearing. In the middle of it stood something strange and wonderful. It looked like a marketplace built from clouds, old suitcases, silk ribbons, driftwood, and slices of moon. There were tiny stalls with glowing glass, hanging flags, baskets full of stardust, and tall bottles filled with colored mist. Small beings moved between the stalls. Some wore feather collars. Some carried lamps on their backs. Some had hoods sewn from leaves. Above one stall hung a sign, "Twine the Thoughtsmith's Workshop." Underneath, in smaller writing, it said, "We untie knots, name storms, and sew pockets for courage." Behind the counter stood a tall, thin figure with silver hair like yarn and fingers so quick they were almost blurry. She wore a dark blue dress covered with tiny pockets, and in each pocket sat something different. A button, a feather, a small watch, a star, a spoon, and a key. "Ah," she said, looking up. "There you are, Naja." "How do you know my name?" asked Naja. The Thoughtsmith smiled. "Because thoughts make different kinds of noise, and your name lies very softly at the edge of yours." She reached out her hand. "I am Twine." Naja took her hand. It smelled faintly of paper, rain, and cinnamon. "Twine," said the Thoughtsmith, "because tangled things are my work. In Danish, I was called Tavire. In English, twine carries the feeling of threads, knots, and the patient work of loosening them." Naja nodded. That made sense. "You need a tool," said Twine. She turned around and began searching among shelves, strings, hooks, and drawers. At last, she found a small parcel wrapped in dusty pink fabric. Inside lay a pair of thin gloves. They were woven from something that looked like moonlight mixed with dust from butterfly wings. "What are these?" asked Naja. "Thought gloves," said Twine. "You wear them when thoughts stick too tightly." "Do they work?" asked Naja. "Only if you use them properly," said Twine. "You must not fight the thoughts. You must lift them a little away from your face so you can look at them." Twine put on one glove and raised her hand in front of herself. "Look," she said, "some thoughts arrive dressed as truth, but they are really only guesses. When you wear the thought gloves, you can say, 'Here, this is a thought, not proof, not a judgment, just a thought.'" She smiled crookedly. "It does not make them disappear, but it makes them less powerful." Naja nodded slowly. It made sense in a way. as if something inside her had already known it, but no one had said it clearly before. Twine placed the gloves in Naja's hands. And one more thing. She found a tiny glass tube with a lid. Inside it there seemed to be nothing, and yet there was something. A gentle, shimmering mist that moved when you looked at it long enough. "This is pause wind," said Twine, "for the moments when everything goes too fast. You open the lid, breathe in through your nose, and breathe slowly out. Then the body remembers that it is allowed to stay." Naja held the tube up to the light. It glimmered like morning sun on a quiet window. "Thank you," she said. Twine leaned slightly closer. "You do not need to become free from feeling, Naja. You only need to learn that feeling is not dangerous." Those words settled inside her like a blanket. Not heavy, just warm. They left the workshop, and the forest grew deeper again. Murmur walked a little ahead now, while Naja held the heart lantern in one hand and the new tools in the other. After a while she could hear water. Not a small stream this time, something larger. They came to a lake. It lay dark and smooth beneath the moon, and the surface was so calm it almost did not look like water. It looked like a giant plate of liquid glass. Around the lake stood silver-grey reeds and shining flowers in pale blue, mother-of-pearl, and soft pink. The air smelled of cool water, night flowers, and something clean, almost like freshly washed bedding in summer air. "Look," said Murmur quietly, "this is Mirror Lake." Naja walked all the way to the edge. In the surface of the water, she did not only see her own reflection, she saw figures, children, young people, grown people, a boy who looked at the ground while he spoke, but inside wished that someone would understand him. A girl who laughed loudly, but afterward was afraid she had been too much. Another person who looked confident from the outside, but every evening wondered if he was enough. Someone who always seemed strong, but was really afraid of being left out. Someone who always said, "I'm fine," even when they were not fine. Someone who felt strange among others, and afterward believed everyone had noticed. Naja gasped softly. "They—" She looked over at Murmur. "They feel it too." Murmur nodded, in their own ways. Naja took out the mirror stone. It began to glow faintly in her hand. When she held it up toward the lake, the images became clearer. Not harsh, not frightening, just honest. She saw something she had never really thought about before. Almost everyone carried something invisible. Something you could not see from the outside. A worry, a comparison, a fear, a longing, a shame, a hope they were afraid to lose. Tears pressed into Naja's eyes, but they were not heavy tears. They were relieving tears. "I am not the only one," she whispered. "No," said Murmur, "you never were." Naja knelt beside the lake. The invisible swarm had not disappeared completely, but its sound had changed. It no longer sounded like chaos. It sounded more like many little voices, each one only wanting to be heard. She took out the pause wind, opened the lid, and breathed slowly in. The scent was cool and clean, like night air after rain. Like wind through white curtains. Like a room where no one demanded anything from you. She breathed slowly out, then again, in and out, and again, in and out. In the reeds around the lake, little lights began to turn on, as if her exhalations made the darkness kinder. After a while, Murmur said, "Now comes the difficult place." "I am not usually very good at difficult places," said Naja honestly. "That does not matter," said Murmur. "You do not have to be good at something to walk through it." They continued. The forest changed again. The trees stood closer together, their branches weaving over the path like arches. The fog lay lower. The air became colder, smelling more of wet bark and stone than flowers. In front of them stood a gate made of dark branches and black flower buds. Above the gate were the words, "The rumor passage." Here thoughts whisper louder than truth. Naja's stomach tightened a little. "That does not sound very nice," she said. "It is not always nice," said Murmur. "Do we have to go in?" "Yes," said Murmur firmly. Naja stepped through the gate. Immediately whispering began around her. Not real voices exactly, more like thought voices. "You think you are wrong. You said something stupid. The others can see it. You do not fit in. You are behind. You are the only one who cannot figure it out. You should be different." Naja froze at all the whispering. It was exactly how it could sound inside her on difficult days. Murmur looked at her. "What do we do now?" he asked. Naja thought carefully. "The heart lantern." She lifted it. The warm light spread around her like a golden circle. The whispers did not disappear completely, but they stepped back a little. Then she put on the thought gloves. She raised her hands in front of her, just as Twine had shown her. "This is a thought," she said, a little uncertain at first. "Not proof," she continued. The whispers fluttered. She tried again. "This is a fear, not the whole truth." Farther away, some of the shadows began to dissolve. She took a breath. "I do not know what everyone else is thinking," she said, "and I do not need to know." One of the largest shadows cracked like fog in sunlight. Murmur's eyes shone with excitement. "Yes," he said, "more Naja." Naja breathed more deeply. "I am allowed to be unsure and still be okay." A storm of dark specks flew past her and settled. "I am allowed to be myself while I practice." Something heavy loosened in her chest. "And just because I feel something strongly, it does not mean everything is dangerous." Then everything became quiet. They were standing in the middle of the rumor passage, but it was no longer dark. The branches above them shimmered green and silver. The black flower buds had opened and become white stars. On the ground, tiny blue flowers grew where her words had landed. Naja looked around. "Was that me?" she asked. "Yes," said Murmur, "not because you made the darkness go away, but because you did not let it decide what was true." Naja stood still for a moment. She did not feel like a different person, not like someone completely new. She only felt a little more gathered. When they came out of the rumor passage, the forest opened. In front of them lay a large round square paved with pale stones. At the center stood a tree with a silver-grey trunk and leaves that shone like stars in twilight. From the branches hung tiny bells, key-shaped leaves, glass feathers, and little lanterns. "This," said Murmur very softly, "is the Quiet Heart Square." Naja walked carefully across the stones. Each stone under her feet lit briefly when she stepped on it. Around the tree stood many beings. Some she knew. Unease the Owl sat high in the tree, looking down with watchful eyes. In the shadow beside the roots sat Twine with her hands folded. And a little farther back, on a low stone, sat a very small figure Naja felt she had glimpsed before. Maybe from another dream, another story, another place. A calm little creature with a leaf-shaped mouth in his fur and gentle eyes. He nodded to her as if they already knew one another. Perhaps he was Rumble. Perhaps he was only a memory of him. In Dreamland, those things sometimes overlap. There were also new beings. A tall, transparent figure made of shining threads, slowly weaving patterns in the air. A small fox-like animal with moonspots and a tail like smoke. 3 tiny sibling creatures carrying bowls filled with stardust. In the middle of the square stood a low table made of pale wood. On it lay small objects: a feather, a stone, a bell, a ribbon, a bowl of water, a key, and a small star. "What am I supposed to do?" asked Naja. Twine stepped forward. "You must choose what you want to take home with you." "But I already have several things." "Yes," said Twine, "the things you have received help you on the way. What you choose now is what you want to remember when you wake." Naja looked at the table. First, she picked up the small star. It was warm. "That is for believing in yourself," said Twine. Then Naja picked up the stone. "That is for standing steady when you become afraid." Then she picked up the bowl of water and saw her reflection inside it. "That is for remembering that feelings are allowed to move," said Unease the Owl. "They must not be frozen in place." Naja touched the bell. A small bright chime spread across the square. "That is for calling yourself back to the present," said Murmur, "when your thoughts run ahead of you." Naja took a deep breath. "I think—" She looked around at them. "I think I want to take the star." The beings nodded. "Then say aloud what you want to remember," said Twine. Naja held the star in both hands. The little light reflected in her eyes. She thought for a long time. Then she said, "I want to remember that I am not the only one. I want to remember that thoughts can be loud without being right. I do not have to guess everything other people think." I am allowed to be unsure and still be good enough. And I am allowed to believe a little more in myself. The square became completely quiet. Not empty quiet. Beautiful quiet. As if the night itself was listening. Then the tree in the center began to shine. Not sharply, deeply and golden. From the branches, tiny glowing leaves drifted down over the square. They landed on Naja's hair, her shoulders and her hands. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, her inside did not feel like a swarm. It felt like a garden where everything did not have to grow at once, where some things were allowed to rest, and some things were allowed to bloom slowly. "It is time," said Unease the owl gently. Naja opened her eyes. "Do I have to go home?" "Yes," said Murmur, "but you do not lose it just because you wake up." Naja looked at all of them. "Will I come back?" Twine smiled. "When you need to, and sometimes before you know you need to." Murmur placed his small, soft hand on hers. "Remember," he said, "when everything is loud, light the lantern, breathe, look for the truth, and speak gently to yourself." Behind her, the moonlit path opened again. Naja took the first steps, then she turned around. The being still stood there in the golden light, surrounded by trees, fragrant night flowers, and the small glow of the Quiet Heart Square. Unease the owl lifted one wing. Twine bowed slightly. Murmur's little bells chimed gently, and then Naja walked on. The path became softer and brighter. The forest dissolved into silver. The scent of moss became the scent of her own room. The wind became the curtain by the window. The glow of the lanterns became the warm light of her lamp, and Naja woke up. She was lying in her bed. Morning had just begun. A ribbon of sunlight slipped through the curtain and lay across the floor. She stayed still for a moment, simply feeling. Her heart was beating calmly. She could still remember the dream. Maybe not every tiny detail, but enough. She placed her hand on her chest. Inhale. Exhale. Then she sat up. The day had not become perfect. There would still be things she had to do. Voices, glances, confusion, thoughts. Situations that might sting a little. But something was different. Naja no longer felt as if she stood alone in the middle of everything. She knew now that many people carried invisible things, that many people fought small, quiet battles. That courage was not only daring everything. Sometimes courage was walking into the day with your beating heart and being there anyway. She went to the shelf and took down her small notebook. On the first empty page, she wrote, "When the swarm comes." Underneath, she continued, "Light the lantern inside. Breathe slowly. It is a thought, not proof. I am not the only one. I am allowed to be myself. I am allowed to believe in myself." She looked at the words for a long time. Then she smiled a little. Not a huge smile, just a real one. One she could feel all the way down in her stomach. And somewhere deep inside, where the invisible swarm used to be loudest, there was now a small quiet glow. A little like a lantern, a little like a star, a little like a beginning. And if you one night should find the swarm path yourself, if you should meet Murmur with his little bells, or Unease the owl beside Mirror Lake, or Twine in the workshop with all the pockets, then you should know this. You are not strange because you feel a lot. You are not wrong because you become unsure. And you are certainly not alone, even when it feels that way. There are places in dreams, in stories, and even inside the heart, where one can learn to stand a little more softly in oneself. So when the day moves too fast and the thoughts become too loud, remember, breathe in. And slowly out. There is more calm in you than you think. And the way to Dreamland is never as far away as it first feels. Good night, and sleep very well. Good night, sleep well.